Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
Will she, won't she? Will she, won't she join the dance? The turtle song in Alice in Wonderland provides a perfect introduction to the dilemma facing the sturgeon, or is it the salmond, as Britain heads for the Brexit.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon believes that the greater support for remaining in the EU, in Scotland, than in Wales and England, provides a trigger for a new referendum on Scottish independence. Or does she? Former First Minister Alex Salmond seems a bit more enthusiastic about Indie Ref 2, and some say is pushing his successor down a road which could either lead to the breakup of Britain or the breakup of the Scottish National Party.
Or it could just be a hard cop, soft cop routine. Either way, it is a high-risk strategy. It rests upon the belief that the Scots will be so in love with the EU, from Belgium to Bulgaria, Romania to Rome, that they will sever their ties with their rather closer English-speaking neighbours and customers in England and Wales. Will she? Won't she? Let's ask the Right Honourable Brian Wilson, a former Labour Cabinet Minister, journalist and broadcaster. Brian, thanks for coming back on the Sputnik. Let's deal with the will she, won't she. Does she want to? Is Salmond pushing her? What's your take on that?
Well, Salmond's certainly pushing her, there's no doubt about that. I don't think anybody knows. I'm not sure she knows herself, but it's a problem entirely of her own making, a dilemma of her own making, because it's all based on this contrivance, really, that Brexit was such a cataclysmic event and is, you know, in terms of what we already know about what the outcome is going to be, that this dramatically changes everything, and therefore there must be another independence referendum. There is no logic in that position. Apart from anything else, you know, I mean, I'm a fairly obvious example. I voted to remain in the EU, but the idea of being counted upon as one of those whose vote justifies calling an independence referendum is patent nonsense. And also, I mean, there was a very, although clearly more people in Scotland voted to remain than to leave, there was a very substantial minority, and the polling shows about 30% of SNP supporters voted to leave. So the idea that they are automatically so indignant about being out of the EU that they want an independence referendum, they might want it for other reasons, but they certainly don't want it for that reason. So the whole thing, it's been a very sort of laboured contrivance to get into this position.
And important figures in the Scottish nationalist movement, like Jim Sillars, former colleague of ours who became a grandee of Scottish nationalism, he's made it clear he'll not be voting for independence if it means going into the EU as an independent Scotland. So the crisscrossing of all these things must make it very problematic as to what the outcome of an Indie Ref 2 would be.
I think it is very problematic, and I think, you know, Jim Sillars is still a kind of big beast, and he's a powerful debater, and him putting that case will be a significant factor. But I think even before you get to what would happen in a referendum, I think really in exposing what they're up to, it's important to recognise, you know, the dishonesty really of the case they're putting forward. It is a contrivance. There is no, you know, what would you be voting on in a referendum? Clearly we don't know what the outcome of Brexit is going to be on 1,000 different fronts, but equally we don't know what independence is going to look like, and we don't know what the EU is going to look like. So to plunge Scotland into another referendum 4 years after the one that was supposed to be the once-in-a-generation referendum on the basis of a complete set of unknowns is, you know, that is not a rational response. And I also think that no matter who's in government in the UK, would be it Tory or Labour, the fact is that the government of the United Kingdom is about to enter the most significant diplomatic negotiations since the Second World War, with huge implications for jobs and living standards and everything else. The idea they should be asked to do that, while on the one hand to be conducting these negotiations, while in the back door they're having to fight a secessionist referendum. I mean, I just think that is unreasonable. It defies common sense, and I think on that point that the Scottish people almost across the board, apart from the real zealots for nationalism, would recognise that is unreasonable, which is why the polls are showing a 2-to-1 majority against having another referendum.
That wouldn't be the first time, though I know you don't like to go there, that happened with a government in London entangled with rather important business vis-à-vis Europe, but a backdoor Scottish nationalist stab in the back, effectively. But that poses at least two alternative possibilities for the British state. Either, as I favour, the British government itself saying, after Brexit, there will be a second Scottish referendum. And incidentally, we'll set the question. Or a British government determination declared now that once in a generation is not 4 years, and there will be no Scottish second referendum. Which is your favourite option of those two?
Well, it's slightly in between. I mean, I am absolutely clear that if Sturgeon forces the question, that the UK government should say, no, you're not having a referendum just now. And obviously there would have to be a facing down of the great squeals of indignation and grievance, and this is an outrage and all the rest of it. But I think that the ground should be laid for why you're saying it. And it's not the imperial power saying we will defy the will of the Scottish people. Insofar as we know, the will of the Scottish people is that there should not be another referendum. What it is saying is the argument I've just made. It is utterly unreasonable, irrational to have these two things going on at the one time, Brexit negotiations and a Scottish referendum. As Jim Sillars said, actually, that who knows, these negotiations might go a lot better than anyone thinks. And on the other hand, who knows what the EU is going to look like at that time. So it might be a different set of circumstances. I mean, what I've always said is, if the people of Scotland want independence, they should have independence. I don't want it. I'll vote against it. I'll campaign against it. But if that is the view, then so be it. And if there is a dominant view in Scotland in a few years' time, there should be another referendum, then so be it. But what I'm not prepared to say, what I'll argue very strongly against now, is being manipulated into a second referendum, which neither has an intellectual basis nor has the support of the majority of the population.
See, I wonder, as you say, apart from the zealots, is the matter of independence and the EU really the biggest priority of the people of Scotland?
We tend to be persuaded to think in terms of black and white. I mean, I voted to stay in the EU, but I've got no illusions that it's some sort of perfect democratic entity. The EU was set up to facilitate the free movement of capital, not the free movement of labour. And a lot of good things have been added onto it. Some of them have been beneficial to Scotland. But if you spoke to fishermen, for instance, you spoke to a lot of people who have lost their jobs because of the free movement of capital, then maybe they wouldn't think it was such a great idea. So I think in many people's minds it's a balance. It's not an absolute, but the biggest thing in their lives is to stay in the EU. I mean, I think there's a much more complex view of that. And so let's see how it rolls. Let's see how Brexit is going to develop. And then maybe form an opinion. But the idea that all Scotland is up in arms because the UK as a whole has voted to come out of the European Union is a fantasy.
You'd think that, though, if you followed the media. I sometimes think it's only thee and me that think the way we both think on this. The political class, the media class, appears overwhelmingly wedded now, including some surprising converts, to the cause of separatism. Is this because of the very substantial decline in the party we once both served, the Scottish Labour Party?
I think I've said this before, and the biggest threat to the Constitution, the biggest threat of independence doesn't come from the SNP, it comes from the weakness of Labour. And the biggest threat over the next 10 years, say, will be if the perception is there's not going to be another Labour government. Then a lot of people who we would know and respect would finally shrug their shoulders and say, well, maybe we have to look for something else. I mean, I have no doubt about that. And I think in the Labour Party's internal affairs, it's something that there is an obligation to take account of, but there are very, very big stakes at stake here, and they're not just the obvious ones. But, but at the moment, the position is, in spite of that, is that it appears the majority mainly because of the economic arguments. There's a whole range of arguments about our ties with the rest of the UK. There's a very obvious argument that what madness is it that we're going to come out of a union which is worth four times more to us in exports than the one that we're supposed to be in.
To join.
Exactly, you know what I mean? So there's all of these things, and of course the economic argument, which again is confirmed just within the last couple of days by the SNP's own sort of think tank on the economy, that the lies that were told the last time about the likely oil price, the whole construction of an economic argument in the white paper, is now shown to have been entirely false. You know, these are the reasons, no matter how people vote in Scotland, these arguments are the ones, that are
well, Scots are not called canny for nothing, and facts are cheels that win a ding, and it takes money to buy mince and all that. At the end of the day, if you can't persuade Scottish people that they will be at least as well off out of the United Kingdom than they are in it, but the possibility exists that they might be very considerably worse off, I don't see how the SNP could win that referendum. It's one of the reasons why I want it to go ahead.
Well, we could win it because we live in irrational political times. And if you can brush these arguments aside, you only need 51% after all.
To cut final rather than
exactly. So you might have 49% of rational people listening to the arguments, and 51% who are really not interested in the arguments because this is what they've been convinced is the way to go. But I believe if there was a referendum just now, that because the economic case is so bad, that the vote would be to remain within the United Kingdom. But what I don't want, George, I mean, we're all pushing on a bit, and for another 18 months of our lives to be devoted to this nonsense, while on every measurement Scottish education is declining, the Scottish economy it really has nowhere to go. 20% of jobs in the financial services sector have gone since 2014. I mean, the list of indicators just goes on and on and on about the price that is being paid for dividing Scotland, not along class lines, not along social and economic lines, but creating this false dichotomy on the Constitution, and that being the only thing that matters in Scottish politics to the people who are now running the Parliament in Edinburgh.
Well, we might be getting on a bit, but there's still life in the old dogs yet. Brian Wilson, thanks for joining us on the Sputnik.
Coming up next, who's fake news? Former MP Chris Williamson speaks out. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Sputnik. The debased standards of the fake news industry sunk a little lower this week, with the brouhaha over the decision by Jeremy Corbyn to publish his tax returns and challenge Theresa May and Philip Hammond to do the same.
The waiting media reporting it turned out to be either illiterate, innumerate, incompetent, or alternatively utterly malignant, no more than a politically directed rat pack.
It is either or, I'm afraid. No alternative explanation exists for yet another big lie that was halfway around the world before the truth had got its boots on. Joining us to discuss it is former Labour MP for Derby North, Chris Williamson. Chris, thanks for coming. Without getting into all the financial technicalities, this was either incompetence on a gigantic scale by the media, or a very malignant and deliberate pack of lies. Which was it, in your view?
Well, I think it was the latter, most certainly. I mean, what we've seen since Jeremy has been elected as the leader, indeed even before he became our leader, is a concerted effort to try and undermine and demonise him. And we've seen this in the past. It happened to Tony Benn 30-odd years ago. Anybody who challenges the status quo is fair game now for the media and the right-wing establishment. And at the end of the day, most of the media outlets are owned by right-wing establishment figures who are desperate to sustain the status quo, out of which they are doing incredibly well. And the reason why, in my view, they're trying to do everything in their power to undermine and demonise Jeremy Corbyn is that he isn't just any other old new Labour leader. He is somebody who is putting forward a new consensus, something which will break up rip up the status quo and actually reintroduce a system in this country which would actually see power devolved more, see greater equality in our country, and challenge the vested interests of the big corporations, the oligarchs, who we know are avoiding their taxes on an industrial scale, and we know that the economy isn't working for ordinary people. And that's all that Jeremy is saying. His message actually is plain common sense when you actually break it down. But the media, regrettably, is doing a disservice to the British people by failing to report on the news and seeking to make up stories. And this latest one over the tax return has backfired spectacularly because they're so desperate to smear and demonise Jeremy at every possible turn. They couldn't wait to rush out a story claiming that he had actually not filled his tax return in properly. Turns out it was absolutely accurate. What is very interesting, however, though, is the deafening silence of the media when it comes to the tax returns of the Conservative Prime Minister, the Conservative Chancellor, these multi-millionaires who we know are doing incredibly well out of the present status quo.
Actually, the tax return of the Prime Minister's husband would be the most important one to see. I take your point, all of your points, but usually there's at least an argument, there's a germ of a possibility of a truth in one of these brouhahas. In this case, if they had turned to page 3 of the tax return, the very figures that they were claiming were not there were there. It was as if a kind of rage forced them into publication or broadcast before they even got to the end of the tax return. Now, if you are a private TV owner or a private newspaper owner, in a way, you're entitled to do what you like. But the BBC ran with this story and ran with it. And it has statutory obligations to balance and fairness and so on. What can be done? What should be done about that?
Well, certainly you expect better standards. I mean, I'm a big supporter of the BBC. They do a great service, I think, in the country. A lot of their drama output and so on from the documentaries is very good. Where I think they fall down, however, is in the news output, and they don't actually get that accurate. Very often they are misleading, and they take their lead from the national right-wing newspapers, and that sets the tone of the news broadcasts that they are responsible for. And so it is very, very disappointing. What needs to be done about it? I mean, I think that, one, it does need to be highlighted that this is, they're getting these inaccuracies, and I think it's important that all of us, licence fee payers, actually, make their feelings known about this. But you expect the governors of the BBC, and indeed we've already seen, haven't we, was it the back end of last year, where there was some concern expressed internally within the BBC about Laura Kuenssberg's reportage of Jeremy Corbyn, and they do have a responsibility, and we do need to continue to press the BBC, it seems to me. But I think they are concerned about their charter renewal. I think that's part of the problem which is driving it. There are many enemies of the BBC within the Conservative Party sitting on the Tory benches. We know that a lot of them would like to break it up and sell it off, probably sell it off to Rupert Murdoch, perhaps. And I think in many ways they're kind of really scared of that. But, they need to be brave. And I think, whenever we get the opportunity to actually, call out the BBC when they get it wrong, we need to be doing that.
It's working, though, isn't it? Regrettably, Chris, the Labour standing in the opinion polls is very poor, as the Labour leaders themselves acknowledge. By-election results patchy, but not even remotely on course to win the next general election. This barrage, this bombardment of fake news it's not at all actually Corbyn's fault. Whoever was the Labour leader would be under this kind of bombardment, and it would have the same effect.
All Labour leaders get a tough time, as you know, George, from the media. I think it is particularly virulent, though, against Jeremy, and I'm not sure when you say any Labour leader would be suffering in the same way. I don't think they would. They would be getting adverse publicity, but not to the extent that Jeremy has sustained. And yes, it is having an effect. There's no doubt about that. The problem is that the lazy journalists in Fleet Street actually refer to the Parliamentary Labour Party as the Labour Party. Yeah. That's not the Labour Party. That's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the Labour Party. The Labour Party has around 600 600,000 members now, and incredibly enthused members who will be a huge force in any election campaign. So although the polls aren't great at the moment, there's no doubt, and I'd like them to be a lot better, obviously, I wouldn't write Labour off. I think that will be a huge movement that we can bring to bear in any election campaign. But if we can get the party, all wings of the party to unite, the grassroots membership, which is by and large pretty united behind Jeremy Corbyn's policy agenda, the trade unions by and large, I think, are on board. If we could just get the PLP to be, singing from the same hymn sheet, to actually be articulating the policies which Jeremy is putting forward, and they are common sense policies. Who doesn't want the economy to work for ordinary people? Who doesn't want to invest in the economy to create secure jobs for people? Who doesn't want to stop global corporations from externalising good quality jobs in this country, by the way, for which they've often had government money for research and development, and then manufacture those products overseas? It's important to remember that at the last election, 15.6 million people didn't vote. And we've actually got to reach out and inspire those people who don't feel that any political party speaks for them. Many millions of people have felt let down, betrayed by all political parties, and that's because New Labour became too close to the Conservatives and people didn't see the difference. We do have an opportunity through the new media, through social media, through programmes like this, of course, to actually, bypass the mainstream media and get out to and speak to people.
Well, that's what Trump did, of course. He just,
Well, he did.
he's speaking directly to the people in his own way. He's not even using his official White House
I'm no
account.
fan of Trump, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I think we can look at that, and the whole weight of the establishment ranged against him, and he was able to bypass. And at the end of that, and I think we can do the same.
It's right what you say. I mean, it's under Jeremy Corbyn that the Labour Party became the largest Labour Party of Europe.
We've got more members in the Labour Party than the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats, UKIP, the Green Party, the SNP, the Democratic Unionist Party. Every other single political party in this country, lump them all together, they've got less members than the Labour Party. That's an incredible story.
That needs to be felt on the ground more than it is now. You see, with a membership that size, and you and I have fought elections, we know what a picture, when you see a picture of activists, we know that it's been taken from an angle and to show the maximum number of people and so on. There needs to be thousands of people on the streets of by-election cities and towns, and hundreds of thousands on the streets in the general election. Are you confident that this membership is a real thing and not just a paper tiger?
I am. And of course, we've got to, those of us that have been around a long time, facilitate the ability of newer members to get involved, because regrettably, there is, if you like, a counter-revolution going on inside the Labour Party, and some of the establishment figures in constituencies are very suspicious of the new members and have tried to keep them arm's length, and we've got to find ways of bringing people in and giving them opportunities to participate. And I think we can do that. I really do. I mean, even before this massive surge in party members, I mean, some of the people on the right of the party, I think are looking back through rose-tinted spectacles because they imply that somehow in the old days, well, all the old members were active. Well, they weren't. It was always a minority of people, even from when I first joined the Labour Party all those years ago, that actually were activists. But, if we can get 5 or 10% of the 600,000 members being active on the street, that is an incredibly strong force. But I believe that we'll get more than that.
Chris Williamson, you're a great talker. I don't know why you're an ex-MP. You should be a current one. Thanks very much for joining us on the Sputnik. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Corbyn, 2 very interesting contrasting tweets from Janice Barnes saying, worst of all are the so-called Labour MPs, the Blairites, who prefer Theresa, the appeaser, over Jeremy Corbyn. And Jessie Carroll, Corbyn and UK Labour, they hate the Brits. They want mass immigration. Nobody will vote for these traitors.
Well, of course, I profoundly disagree with that, but I guess there's no time to fully articulate it. I agree with the point that Chris made, that no one can write off anybody in these turbulent political times.
Well, that's all the time we have for the tweets today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
But you can stay in touch with us on social media, Twitter and Instagram, RT_Sputnik, or Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.